You're very welcome to the Fun and Fast Golf Podcast. I'm your host, Shane Darby. With the 151st Open Championship just around the corner, I was motivated to learn a bit more about the evolution of the golf course at Hoylake, which is the second oldest golf club in England. Joe McDonnell, member at Hoylake for over 30 years, joined me for a proper geek out on how Royal Liverpool has evolved since 1869, when a 9-hole course was initially laid out by Robert Chambers and George Morris. We cover many of the historical developments from the beginning of the club's history to the preparations for the upcoming Open, which will see the course hosting the event for the 13th time. Thanks to Joe for his time and a savant-like recall of detail. Bizarrely, he did it without any notes. Many thanks to you for tuning in, but most importantly, enjoy the coverage or live experience of the event. It's going to be a great one. Go easy. Hey Joe, how are you?
Hi Shane, I'm very well. Very well, thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us today.
Most welcome.
Maybe to get going, obviously we're here to have a chat about the 151st Open host, Royal Liverpool Golf Club. Saw some pictures of the course recently. Obviously we've had some pretty decent weather. Mind you, it's changed a little bit of late, but the course was looking pretty toasty. How has the summer been for Mr. Bledge and his merry band of greenkeepers?
Unpredictable, I would say. Don't want to speak too much on his behalf, but I think quite unpredictable. We had that very, very dry period where the course was definitely toasting, as you say. I think the difficulty he has is obviously we have sprinklers, but the challenge is trying to not have it look too patchy and mottled and keep control of what's watered and what's not. I think it's going to be a difficult one for him because the weather is very changeable at the moment. We've got warmth, but we've also got a lot of rain recently. So I think he'll just be looking to try and get a consistent looking colour, I think, even though we know it doesn't mean anything. I think for his peace of mind, I think he wants it to look as attractive as possible. Why wouldn't you?
Exactly. I guess the chances are we're not going to have a replica of the old course last year.
No, it's not looking that way, is it? I think we're a bit late in the day to suddenly start browning out completely. So I think it's going to be, not soft by any means, but I think it's not going to be 2014 conditions, nor is it going to be 2006 conditions. So somewhere in the middle.
Well, maybe if we, for those uninitiated that are listening and are uninitiated, needless to say, who the hell is Joe McDonnell and why are you here?
I should ask you, why am I here? I am Joe McDonnell and I'm a lifelong member of Hoylake and a golf geek. Very happy to hold my hand up and say that. And I got into golf in a full-time capacity at the start of this year, having come into it through sheer love of the sport about sort of 4 or 5 years ago. And I had dabbled in the dark arts of commercial side of golf for those few years, and then finally took the leap out of my previous role, which was within software. So I am a professional within the golf industry. So there we go. Excellent.
Well, you're head of imagery, amongst other things, for Clayton, DeVries and Punt. Mm-hmm. What does that entail? I mean, certainly people will have seen some of your renderings and artistic impressions of various holes at Royal Liverpool and farther afield. It's pretty stunning in terms of the end product that you come up with. How did you get into that?
Thanks, Shane. It was a happy accident. I was experimenting with different techniques to show ideas, to capture whether it's an idea or some form of evolution. I'm particularly interested in evolutions of courses. I've always been into maps. I've been a real map guy for as long as I can remember, and also massively into landscapes, really intrigued by cool landscapes and sort of earth moving and stuff. And I think it was just a combination of trial and error, really. It was just going down a bit of a rabbit hole with techniques and different bits of visualization. And then the whole thing came together in this cocktail cocktail of trying to merge beauty, something that looked different, but also captured the soul and the essence of the courses that I was working on. Not all courses are blessed with interesting topography, but the ones that I find most interesting are like Hoylake and the old course, and places that have either micro or macro contour, but certainly some interest in the land. And they just work so well in the technique that I use, which is a mixture of 3D, Photoshop, QGIS I use, which is a mapping and sort of point cloud manipulation tool. All of these are incredibly boring scientific terms for basically terrain modeling.
So, for those that didn't understand a word you were saying there, I guess maybe a good analogy to use is what Renaissance Design have done for the Lido project in Sand Valley in Wisconsin. They presumably would have used some of the same techniques, or Brian Ziegler and was there some other fella?
Yes, Peter Flory. Yeah. So Peter would have he will have sculpted the surfaces in accordance with the photos that he was finding and the research that he was doing. So within the video game, it gives you shortcuts really to working with landscapes for golf. Obviously they've created a very powerful engine for you to go and sculpt these courses. Somebody's worked out a way to import existing landscape data into the program, which you can then use as your starting point. But Peter obviously has dedicated a huge number of hours to working on this course, and has ported it from version to version, getting newer and newer and making it better and better. And we all know the story. I presume lots of people listening to this will have heard Peter speak about it, and Brian Ziegler and Tom Doak and Brian Schneider, and they took what was a computer game model, which had been sort of mesh molded, and then exported it into contour lines. And those contour lines were then used by the shapers to move the dirt into place using basically a guide. It's a bit like by numbers. We should definitely give a shout out to Brian Schneider though, because this thing it's not an automated, let it go and these robots go and build it for you. Absolutely not the case. Brian Schneider has been there and has been doing all the sort of finishing and true sculpting of the course. So in no way is this some sort of robot built, autonomous robots building this golf course for them. Anything but I think it's managed to get all of the sort of macro earth moving into place beforehand.
The first time I came across your good self was, I think, that map that you did for the old course some years ago on behalf or in conjunction and in partnership with Jasper Miners of Evaluate Haines.
Yes.
Which was, I think, work on from what Mackenzie did in the 20s in terms of his survey of the golf course. Would that be fair?
Yes, absolutely. I've been tinkering with some, as I say, techniques. I've just been doing some trial and error, messing around with things that I thought looked interesting and showed a story. And Jasper had independently been working on a sort of side project himself using Google Earth and pins and trying to pull together all these various sources of information about the old course and the names of the features, pull them into one place. And he had this Google Earth map full of pins and names. And he said to me, this is, whilst it's interesting to me, nobody else is going to be interested in looking at this. Is there any chance you fancy doing something like collaboration where we put it together into something more presentable and easy on the eye? And I said, yeah, let's do it. So we did, and that was a bit of fun. And then people started to get in touch to say, is this something we can buy? So we thought about it a bit, and it wasn't as straightforward as saying, yes, I'll send you a print in the post. It was, we tried to put some infrastructure around it. And part of that was doing a deal with the Links Trust, who are, very careful about who is able to use their trademark terms and other things. So we partnered with them and did it officially above board and all that. And yeah, it's great. It spun off into sort of a nice little project, and we did multiple courses working with our friend Sam Cooper, who's the drone pilot and good surveyor. So he was going to these courses and taking surveys of the land and getting high resolution aerial imagery. And the three of us, plus I should say Jasper's wife Karen, who looks after all the e-commerce for Evaluate18. So we four have been working together for about 4 years now.
And one last plug for yourself and Sam. I believe you have a little sideline of course guides or course maps, or what would colloquially be known as stroke savers.
Yes, stroke saver. Oh, you can't say stroke saver, can you? Because that's like saying Hoover. Same thing. So yes, no, it's course guides, I think, is the description really. We've always been keen to, when we do these things, to move away from sort of a cartoonish image littered with numbers. Huge amounts of numbers and science and maths going on the page, which these days I think I'm right in saying most people will tend to have some form of watch or yardage rangefinder and some sort of new technology. So the books feel more and more like they're keepsakes, mementos of a great day, rather than they are an actual tool which is used on the course. I mean, obviously we know it's different for the professional game, but for your standard amateur, I think part of a package that you would take away from a course would be, this stuff that you could look at afterwards and just enjoy what you've just played and studied, look at the hole, rather than doing maths, as I say, standing on the fairway and, pacing things off and such. So.
Well, I'm one of those weirdos that essentially buys the course planner at every golf course. I actually got very upset there recently. I mistakenly left behind my course planner for Hoylake Golf Club Terrace at Hoylake. I did send an email to the general manager, Marco Sturkenberg, which he hasn't replied to yet, wondering if I could buy another one. Anyway, we live in hope that I can actually replace that. But
fingers crossed for you. Is your OCD ticking
first
badly?
World problems.
Yeah. Okay.
Listen, obviously we're here to chat about the evolution of the golf course at Hoylake. So maybe you might tell us. You're a member there. What, over 30 years? Is that right?
Yeah, somewhere around that. I think I joined in '92. It was around the same time when the Dowie Par 3 was being rebuilt. So around 92, yes, so just over 30 years. Well,
in honour of, I just saw Procter and Hartzell's new episode of the Duffers Literary Guide dropped. So in honour of the two boys, I'm going to start by reading a bit of Bernardo
nice.
With regard to Hoylake. So it's from page 112. That the course is either interesting or difficult, all will not agree. But those who disagree most loudly with the statement will, I venture to assert, usually be found to be the worst of players. I call Hoylake a rotten course. There are no bunkers to get over. The fellow was playing with top to all his tee shots and never got into trouble. Such is a verdict often heard after a first visit to Hoylake. The critic then further be asked his opinion of St Andrews, and it will generally be found that he classes St Andrews and Hoylake together as the two worst courses he has ever seen. He may forthwith be treated with silent contempt, and his opinions may be ignored. He's effectually written himself down as an ass. What this person says is absolutely true. There are very few bunkers in front of the tee at Hoylake, and the man who tops his tee shot does escape condign punishment more often than he would on a golf course designed on principles of perfect equity. Those short drives, however, though they do not plunge the culprit waist-high in sand, bring their own penalty by making it practically impossible for him to reach the green in the right number of shots. And we leave it there. I guess in terms of the rules of engagement today, and for ease of understanding, we're probably better off sticking with the way the members play the holes as opposed to what you're going to see in the championship.
Well, it's a tricky one, isn't it? It's still tricky for members to try and explain numbers and holes. We've with the coming of the new hole, the new par 3, it's changed the routing again. So not only is it sort of a question of doing maths and adding 2 or taking 2 away for the open routing, it's now a different routing again as of 2019 or start of 2020. So the last few years has been another one to learn as well. So it's very tricky. I find myself using hole names. It's kind of the only consistent way of describing things, but it requires somebody to have a little sort of key cheat sheet next to them to cross-check which names correspond to which holes. So anyway, there we go. A challenge.
Exactly. Well, look, I'm sure we'll muddle through. And if people are wondering, we potentially will make a mistake, and I certainly will make a mistake. But hey, listen. Obviously, the course was founded in 1869. In 1969. There was golf at the Rabbit Warren prior to that. Am I correct in saying that?
Apparently so. I think it had been loosely used for the activity of what would become a more formal game of golf. But yes, the Rabbit Warren was classic links land. It was mostly used for farmers to house their livestock. There was a lot of unused land for livestock, which was prone to flooding down towards the southern end of the course. And the sort of flatter areas around the practice ground now were the race course, the Hunt Club. And the Hunt Club was in existence before golf got there. So yeah, the Rabbit Warren and the Hunt Club were coexisting for a couple of decades before golf took off properly.
So Chambers and Morris laid out 9 holes in 1869 with a further 9 added in 1871, where the club achieved its royal designation. What can you tell us about the early golf course as 9 and 18 at Hoylake?
So it was a 9-hole course. The early pioneers of the club who set up the club itself were, it was an experiment. It was a risk. It was a gamble. They were putting their money in, and it wasn't certain whether golf would actually take off in the way they hoped. Clearly, it had blossomed nicely in Scotland, but it wasn't certain that England would have the same appetite for it. But they certainly loved it, and particularly James Muir Dowie, who would become the club's first captain. He was by marriage related to Robert Chambers, the Scotsman, and a sort of golf man. And he asked Robert Chambers, along with George Morris, who was Tom Morris's brother, to come down and lay out 9 holes. They saw the land and they identified that it was a good piece of land for golf. And it wouldn't strike you as an amazing piece of land for golf because, of course, Hoylake is kind of synonymous with fairly flat terrain, particularly around the racecourse area. But the benefit was that it wouldn't cost them huge amounts of money to get golf going pretty much straight away. The terrain was ready to use with the help of some rudimentary agricultural tools. You could play a good game of golf across this land without having to shift huge amounts of earth, or basically the obstacle really was rabbit scrapes, which would then become more formalised bunkers in later years. But rabbit scrapes and hoof prints. And there was, in the original 9 holes, there was 1 hole that played a long part of the course, just 1 hole of the 9. And that was the course hole, which is now our first hole, except the first iteration of the course had just that single hole playing down the first part of today's fairway. So that was the course hole. But realistically, it wasn't, the racing wasn't really that much of an issue. It was only there they crossed over by a few years, and racing was starting to dwindle. The interest was dwindling at that site. So I think there were only a handful of race meets that happened whilst the golf was in existence.
It may be useful to just consider how the size of the property changed and expanded over time.
So the use of the dunes was off the cards. Anything going out towards what are today's sort of beachy side holes were just, there was no way it was going to happen. The land was too poor, the soil was awful, and the rushes at the time, the sort of sea rushes were impenetrable. It was too thick and just basically unusable land. So that was off the table, and they decided, because of obviously the popularity and the success of the initial 9 holes was rapid. It took off. More members were trying to join, and they first expanded to 12 holes quite quickly, I think, and then 18. The first iteration of 18 holes in 1871 went down the spit of land, which is now our 8th fairway. So if you go, you can imagine the course. If you know it, then you'll stand on the 7th tee, the Dowie hole, and you'll play a par 3, then a par 5, the 8th, right to the furthest point on the property. And that's right in the south corner. And there's a spit of land there that actually had about 7 holes on it. So what happened was the initial 9, they just bolted on holes. They kept the 9 and they bolted another 9 on, going down this spit of land. But the problem they had was some of the holes were crisscrossing, so there was a bit of danger about that. But also they were very short. They were these sort of 220-yard par 4s in a big row, and it really felt like a tack on. Apparently, they just bolted these holes on to make it 18 holes, and it wasn't very good. Anyway, later in 1872 and the following couple of years, they worked on this routing and managed to sort of rejig some of the holes of the original 9 in order to accommodate a bit of extra space, to allow these kind of lackluster holes that were going down that spit of land to breathe a bit. And they just rerouted them, and something much more coherent came out of it. So that's where the royal designation came in, because actually that first iteration of 18 wasn't very good, whereas the second one was, and was deemed worthy of the Duke of Connaught and his patronage.
I've a note here, further to our previous discussion, that internal out of bounds may be something worth talking about before we get on to a plethora of firsts.
It's a funky one, and it still comes up in conversation, obviously. It's going to be a topic this open. It's an unusual feature to many visiting overseas players, particularly Americans, that have a problem with internal out of bounds. The thing with out of bounds at Hoylake is that most of the out of bounds was due to the fact that it was literally out of bounds. I mean, it wasn't owned by the club, it wasn't leased by the club. So therefore it was that was what it was. It was out of bounds. Your ball went over there and that was it. And then in time, because the boundaries for the course in the early days, particularly leading up to about 1900, were quite fluid. It certainly didn't look like it does today. None of the houses around the perimeter would have been there. The borders were much more expansive than they are today, and we're obviously locked in by housing now. Apart from on the beach side, everything's locked in by housing. But in the old days, it would have been vistas, going over to the hills, over to Wales, up to Grange Hill, up to the Caldy Hills, and then all over. It wouldn't have been encased by housing. So the boundaries are still fluid, in the negotiations between Lord Stanley of Alderley, who was the landowner, and the club. And, the boundaries were a bit flick-flacky. We had a couple of holes that no longer exist, which are houses. And in the sort of sale and negotiation of that land, we managed to acquire some other land and built a couple of new holes on it, which are the 5th and the 6th today. But at the time, I should say, it was close. It was touch and go whether the club would take a bit of land that went right out to the corner of the Wirral. And at the moment, that is an old people's home. And their big garden goes right down to a wall, which is surrounded by rocks. And when the tide comes up, it's real sort of Turnberry, Pebble Beach style vibes. But sadly, they didn't decide to take that bit of land, even though they drew up 2 holes to get the routing to go out there. They decided against it. And I think part of the reason was the quality of the land and the difficulty with which, the difficulty of making it ready for golf. So instead, they took the patch of land that is now the 5th and 6th. And it used to be Hoylake Rugby Club. And Harold Hilton was captain of Hoylake Rugby Club at the time, would you believe?
There you go. I'm assuming just a little bit of local knowledge, not that I have a huge amount of local knowledge in terms of the Merseyside area. I'm assuming that Lord Stanley had something to do with Stanley Park in Liverpool.
You could be right. He certainly gives his name to the Stanley Road, which is one of them that the course backs onto. But the Stanley, yes, I would imagine where you see Stanley, it may not have been him, but certainly his family, the Stanleys.
Yeah. So sorry for throwing that from left field at you.
That's fine.
Obviously, one thing that struck me in terms of preparing for today was the plethora of firsts, really, that seemed to be associated with the history of matches and champion golfers. Obviously, John Ball, Harold Hilton, the Scotland-England match, which would become the home internationals eventually. 1885 Amateur Championship, started by Royal Liverpool Golf Club. Arno Massey became the first non-British winner of the British Open, as it was at the time. And I think Bobby Jones bookended his career, first and last championships won at Royal Liverpool. Pretty spectacular history.
The history is quite unbelievable, and that's why I got into it so hard. I moved away for work reasons down south to London, and spent a lot of time on the train going in and out of London to where we lived, which is around Reading area and near to those sort of Berkshire, Surrey sandbelt. And all that time on the train, I was spending getting immersed in golf books, history books, mainly the Hoylake series. We've got about 6 or 7 really well-written books from either members or fans of the course, and I was just gobbling them up on these train journeys. And the the history of the place is quite staggering. It sits with the likes of Prestwick and even the old course in terms of rich heritage. It's quite unbelievable. And I hadn't realised this when I was playing all those years ago, first as a junior and then as a sort of young adult, playing a lot of golf, lots and lots and lots of golf on this course that you think you know so well. And around a clubhouse that's filled with this incredible memorabilia, pictures, artwork, everything else. And you spend all this time around that stuff without truly knowing about it. But yeah, being at arm's length and sort of cut off from home, it really whet my appetite for the history of the place. And in the research and sort of rabbit hole that I was going down, it took off. My interest was piqued, and every time I came back, occasionally from London, the first thing I'd want to do is get down to the course and go and see some sort of footprint of a lost bunker or an old green, and just it just staggered me. I loved it. The evolution of the place, the history of the roll call of amazing people that you've just listed. It's quite unbelievable.
Tell me this, when you were out trying to re-find borrow pits and whatever else you found out there, did your fellow members think you were nuts, or was there other people out helping you find these things?
I think everybody thinks I'm nuts, and that's fine. Sam Cooper is my partner in crime. We are unashamed, unabashed geeks. We love it. He had got into serious drone photography and surveying, as I said earlier in the program, and part of that, obviously, as any good photographer will tell you, the best pictures normally landscape pictures come from start and end of the day, golden hour, and with Hoylake being such a comparatively flat course from ground level, you'd assume there's nothing to be seen in certain parts of the course because it does feel flat when you're on the ground. But if you send a drone up at golden hour with a dipping clear sunlight, then it starts to reveal its stories and character. You can see loads and loads of features all over the course, like lost bunkers, sort of edges of where the old racetrack used to be, the horse racing, lost green sites. So these things, while you see them in a camera shot, I could go and confirm what we were seeing in that sort of short space of time in just a single photo or short video by going to survey data and going and sort of shining a light across it in 3D. And the beauty is, of course, in 3D, you can shine a light from any angle. You don't have to wait for the sun to do what you need it to do. So actually having that ability to manipulate where the light is shining across a surface, it really helps show up all these bits of, character that we were seeing. So yeah, it's been a great journey with Sam. We've had a lot of fun.
So one of the things that sort of struck me, obviously, is when the club was founded. First of all, you used the John Ball's father's hotel as the clubhouse, and that essentially had some club rooms eventually, and then obviously slightly later on the clubhouse was built. What can you tell us about the hotel as the clubhouse, and then ultimately the development of the actual clubhouse that we know today?
Well, I think they'd always had the Royal Hotel in mind as a clubhouse because the course was laid out in such a way that it started and finished in front of the Royal Hotel. I think they were acutely aware of the fashion for Victorians to come to the seaside, come and stay at the Royal Hotel. They had a big sweeping garden leading down to the sea. Obviously, Victorians were very into this idea of seaside air, take the ozone and things. So it became very popular to go to the seaside. And the rail network was bringing people into Hoylake and West Kirby. And it became a popular seaside destination, independent of golf, of course, way before that. And then and golf took off, and they had in mind that they would use the Royal Hotel as the clubhouse. And that worked for many years, but it came time in 1895 when the decision was made. We've outgrown the sort of smallish rooms that we've got in the Royal Hotel. It was also quite an austere, not particularly attractive building. I mean, you can see old photos of it. It's more of a sort of very large, imposing block, which was demolished in the 50s, I think. But the new clubhouse that we have today was built in 1895 and has been sort of added to and bolted on for all the years subsequently. But that was the 1895 move, and at that time it was part of a play to get the Open Championship, which eventually did arrive in 1897. That first one, won by Harold Hilton. But yeah, the clubhouse was a really interesting one because the routing, our sort of slight routing headache started there. So what was the second hole is now our first hole. So the course would have been hole number 2, and you would have started on our final hole, stand hole. And yeah, from then on, they apparently in 1895, when they made the move, the first, I think it was the autumn meeting of that year, was played in the current open routing, so start on 17. But apparently it was not adopted. I don't know whether there was a vote. There's no record of that, but it just didn't seem to take hold. So they went to what we have today, which is start on the course hole, dogleg, out of bounds on the right.
So my understanding, obviously, post World War One, Colt and company were invited to take a look at the golf course, particularly Harry Shapland Colt himself. And you might just bring us through what he would have found prior to, in terms of his original survey, and what he did in relation to improvements, and what precipitated that.
Well, the course was changing quite a lot up till 1897 for the first Open. That was, when you look at that old course and the use of the land, it was smart, it was good. There was space where space was needed, and it was a good, coherent 18 holes. After that, there were some fashion changes, let's say. Some of the green sites were, the locations were dictated by, problems of the day, like holding water and such. So there were quite a few greens that were sited in depressions so that water would run into them and they would stay green and mowable and whatever else, and make good putting surfaces. But over time, people realised that actually having a green in a depression, or lots of greens in depressions, created a fairly one-dimensional style of play, which was balls would run and find themselves down in these sort of low areas, and it was becoming a bit too easy, perhaps, if you want to say that. So Harry Colt's remit was multifaceted. One of the things he was invited to do was have a think about where some of the green sites were, particularly the far hole, the 8th, used to have a green site that was in a depression, and balls were feeding easily with modern-ish equipment, including a Haskell ball, were feeding down into the green too easily in 2 shots, and it was always intended to be a 3-shot hole. So they said, is there anything you can do? And he did. He proposed having a green where it is today, which is up on top of the dune instead of at the base of it. And it has a sort of hog's back fairway leading into it, which rejects balls that are running, too wide of the mark. So yeah, things like that. So where are the green sites? Completely remodel the bunkering, because when you look back at pre-Harry Colt pictures, you can see all of the bunkering consisted of these long strips, and these long strips would sit next to a turf wall and would act as a sort of strange hurdle-like hazard. And the turf walls, we call them cops. They were created by land renters, people who took parcels of land from Lord Stanley of Alderley and kept their livestock in those. So it was to keep the livestock in, because they were solid turf walls that were quite tall. They'd be at least waist height. So your sheep or whatever else would stay within your little area of land. But also, it's become apparent that actually they acted as a flood defence in certain conditions, because, like I was saying earlier, right down that spit of land where 8 is, that used to get flooded quite a lot. So yeah, it served 2 purposes. But anyway, these turf walls, which were compacted dirt, they'd been dug from the trench which sat next to it. So obviously they came as a pair. You had this sort of trench, and then you had the turf wall next to it. And the trenches used to catch blown sand from the beach, and they acted as a sort of natural bunker. So all over the course, you'd find green sites that were situated, because of the style of the day, the Victorian tastes. You'd have green sites that sat in front of a turf wall and a strip bunker, and then you'd have tees situated in front of a strip bunker and a turf wall. So when Bernard Darwin talks about these asses who don't get it, those were the taste of the day, were this obsession with badly struck balls off tee and approaches being punished. You can't be getting away with a thin or a top. You had to hit a clean shot to get over these hurdles. And, they'd realised by this stage that actually that was kind of crap golf. The taste had changed. So he was invited to get rid of some of those, to try and bring it into the sort of new age. round off all the geometric greens. So we had these huge rectangular greens. The old 18th and 16th were vast, like huge croquet lawns, and he was invited to come and round them off, make them more irregular and more appealing to the eye, because I think tastes had moved well away from this sort of straight line architecture stuff. So among others, it was bunkers. It was get rid of those strip style things in front of tees and greens, and rethink the green sites were the main thing. We had a big problem with the 11th hole and the blindness of it. That was another one. Blindness. Get rid of blindness wherever we can. So the 11th and 12th hole. 11th was a par 3, and that's the Alps hole. That had been changed multiple times over the years, but the green site had stayed basically where it was, which was beyond the big dune that now houses the championship tee for 12. And that big dune was just blocking your view of the green, which would, sat just beyond it in a depression, and it would just accept balls. And it was too random. That's what they said anyway at the time. It was too random. You could hit a good shot and end up losing your ball, or you could hit a bad shot and end up right next to the flag. So it was a bit of a lottery, not enough skill involved, too much chance. So they decided, get rid of that. So Harry Colt came and built up an entirely new par 3 that we have today. I mean, it's basically the same as it was. The tees slightly shifted, the bunker configuration shifted and such, but pretty much it's where it was in 1923 when he built it. And the 12th hole, which in my opinion is the best hole on the course, big dogleg left, but at the time before Harry Colt, the teeing ground was over on the left hand side, and your drive was blind. So you're playing to a big expansive fairway, but it was completely blind. And then your approach was to an old green, which would have been straight off the back of today's first leg of fairway. And instead, he decided to push the green right up towards the dunes. So you had 2 new green sites, both sitting close to the waterfront. They, in those days, would have been very much closer to the actual water than they are today. But since 1930 onwards, we've developed this sort of embryo dune system and marsh, which separates the course from the actual beach. So, yeah, he did majestic things. And I think one of the most lamented losses of Harry Colt's work was on the 17th, the Royal Hole, which used to, it was probably the greatest example of flatland architecture you could possibly think of. So smartly laid out on such relatively uninspiring land. You were playing to a set of bunkers on your right-hand side, which was obviously the best place to be to gain access to a green that was benched hard against the road and the pavement. And it served, there for just under 70 years until it was deemed too dangerous. So sadly, the green had to be moved away from the road, and Donald Steele was the man who did that in 2000 ahead of the 2006 Open. But no longer is the Harry Colt green there. But those who remember it fondly, I would say. I certainly do. I remember it well.
It's funny. I mean, I'm just wondering in terms of, obviously at the time, the tendency for Colt was to, as you say, place new greens and bench them into ridges and high spots, if you like. Obviously, traditionally, they had been located in areas that would collect water. How was the water supply sort of back then? Was there potable water? Do you know what the scenario was? Was it irrigation ponds that they used to use in terms of keeping water on the greens?
Honestly, I don't know for sure. What I do know is that certain techniques were used to layer up these greens that were on slightly raised areas, particularly our 10th hole, the D hole. I believe the R&A and Ali Beggs has taken cores from these greens, to check the layering. And I think they did the same at Portrush as well, and had to relay some of the greens because their lifespan had expired. They were so ingenious at the time when they were first installed because they enabled the land to hold just the right amount of water to keep it green and playable without sort of everything draining straight through, because it obviously being on a sand dune, if they'd gone with a normal technique of laying a green, as in basically just flattening it and mowing it, then you would have lost all the water and it would have just dried out. And it did actually do that to the 10th green, because that wasn't, as far as we know, a Colt alteration. He may have recommended it, we don't know. He certainly was familiar with Hoylake and had played multiple elite amateur tournaments there for many years before 1913 when that green was built. But we don't know for sure. What we do know is that it was a bit unpredictable. Sometimes it would dry out and burn and crisp up, and they'd have to move to a relief green at the bottom of the dune. But it flick-flacked between that for a few years. So whatever they did in the subsequent years, they managed to get a handle on what actually the green should be composed of in order to hold it and make sure the water kept it fresh. So yeah, lots of different techniques going on around these sort of raised green areas. But as far as I know, there's some sort of clever layering system where there was like a semi-porous, some sort of composite.
Yeah, I mean, again, here's my inner nerd coming out. Cinder and ash and maybe some tiles were kind of used, perhaps on occasion.
Quite probably. Some sort of gravelish mix, I think.
Yeah, am I correct in assuming, or maybe I'm not, can we attribute the on-course works to Frank's Harris brothers, or was it the on-course greenkeeper, or who carried out the works in terms of to the cult plan?
It's a good question. We don't know that for sure. It would just be assumption. I don't know if there's any actual record in the club minutes of whether it was Colt himself or whether the Harris guys, did the business. I don't know. Is the honest answer. I'm not sure. But certainly Colt came back for, I think, somewhere in the region of 15 years after his first sort of major master plan was submitted in 23. Not everything he recommended was implemented, but certainly over the following 15 years leading up to World War II, he was coming back to the club. He definitely installed a centerline bunker on the 18th. It's no longer centerline and it's no longer there, but you can still see the depression of where it used to be. It was taken out in 07. It used to be a bunker on the near right side of the drive on 18. And in the old days, the hole played much straighter than it does today. It plays in a much more left to right sweeping style dogleg. But in the old days, it was a straight away hole and there was no fairway bunkering to speak of. It was very bland, particularly flat area of the course. But he installed a bunker in the fairway. It was a centerline bunker and it was in 1933. So we know for sure that a decade later, he was still coming back and doing things to the club. What we don't know is exactly when he stopped advising. It could be that he even advised post-World War II, but we're not sure. He's not named.
So I understand, obviously, World War II got in the way. So that's 39 to 45, I think. Mm-hmm. And I've got a note here, the school field purchase. When did that take place? Am I in the right sort of ballpark from a date? No.
No. Oh, School field was a big assist in getting the Open back after the long gap between 67 and 06.
So forget I even asked that question just now. So we're going to
come back to it later. Yeah.
Come back to it later. So obviously,
what we did have. Go on. What we did have in World War II is really interesting. We've got some great old pictures of the course in 1942, I think, where the plane, whatever it was, the camera plane has done a great flyby of the down the dune side, and you can see all the old glider posts that were in the fairways because obviously being quite flat in places, it made ideal landing or potential landing for German gliders. So there were posts bolted into the grounds of certainly 3 or 4 of the fairways. And also there was a minefield created in the dunes to stop enemy landing craft. And when you look at the old pictures, it's just a beach. They could easily have come up in a quiet some sort of craft and just got out there and just walked into the dunes and you're there. But mines were installed. The story goes that occasionally you'd hear a bang and it might have been a sheep getting blown up. But there we go. But yeah, the old pictures are fantastic. You can see those sort of defences and everything else there ready to go. Pre-marsh, there was no marsh that had properly taken hold by that stage, but it was coming very, very shortly after the 40s. It really took hold. The embryo dune system ridge was created. So the Half Moon Bay that used to be turned into now is just the marsh.
And of course, I think the first hosting of the Open Championship post-World War II at Royal Liverpool was won by an Irishman, Fred Daly, 1949, I believe. Famously, there's a YouTube clip of his speech after winning, suggesting that the clean air of the north coast of Ireland would do the claret jug some good.
Good on him. Good lad. That was, I think he was quite a popular winner, wasn't he?
It certainly was.
Yeah. We have a great old photo that I find really interesting of Fred Daly on the punch bowl hole, so our 9th. And in days gone by, it used to have a dune that came right across the front of the green and jutted out so that it made the approach basically blind. What we wonder is that in the Harry Colt remit, where he was invited to come and get rid of blind shots where they existed, it's weird that he didn't get rid of that one. because you can see it quite clearly behind Fred Daly when he's on the green there. And it was taken out in 53. Tom Bridges, who was the head greenkeeper of the day, was involved in that. And they sliced it in half, and we've got what we have today. But at the time, it was very much more a complete punch bowl than it is today. And we don't know why it wasn't taken out. I suspect when I look back at old aerials that actually the fairway was further left of where it is today. And actually your view from on the left side would have been clearer of the flag and the green than it is today, because we've shifted the fairway further to the right and made it straighter. So that's my suspicion anyway. I think it wasn't as much of an issue in Colt's time than it is today.
Would be remiss of me not to mention Mr. 5 times he's also a winner there, Peter Thompson, of course.
Absolutely. No, we've got a great roster of winners. It's the course has played host to some great competitions and identified great winners. I hope we get the same this year. I really do. I mean, obviously the last two have been stellar, but I just hope we get a good winner. It does seem to identify classic players. So yeah, we will see. So my next note with regard to design heritage is Hawtree, the middle Hawtree in 1959. Would that be correct? Correct. Yep, 59. He was invited to put together a master plan. Again, like all these master plans, not everything was taken on board, but some was. And this was his big radical change was the merging of the old straight par 5 third and the short par 3 fourth. So it was the long hole and the cop hole. Those two holes were actually part of the existing 9. So it would have been quite a big change, quite radical to have got rid of those two. But anyway, they did it, and it was voted in. And he merged the two holes into a single sweeping dogleg that we have today, or almost what we have today. It's subsequently been altered by Steele in 2000. But the big sweeping dogleg left, and then an entirely new par 3 installed, which is the new hole, the fourth. And that's a great par 3, really good. And it was a master stroke because I think the thinking went that you needed to get into the duneland earlier in the round, because before that you played 7 holes on the bounce that were on the flat, and then you got to the 8th hole where the fairway started to get interesting. But actually his idea was, how about we get a par 3 in the duneland much earlier in the round, so therefore it breaks up this sort of the landscape sameness, and it was brilliant, and it still is an excellent hole, that fourth hole. I think it's slightly overshadowed by Colt's 11th, but I think not by much. It's a fabulous hole.
Just thinking when I was writing these notes, I think around about that time, the open coverage moved from black and white to colour, and if memory serves, at least initially, I guess historically, revetments were used to shore up collapsing bunkers. And perhaps with the advent of colour TV, the R&A may have decided that actually the contrast that revetments provide, the colour TV set, gives more interest to the picture. And I guess we think now that links golf is synonymous with revetting. Am I down the particular correct path there? Is that a cul-de-sac?
It's a good question, and it's one that I've tried to answer myself, and I've asked many people who are very knowledgeable, and I don't think there's any definitive clear answer about that. There's certainly what the fashion, let's call it a fashion and not attribute the blame or the credit to anybody. The fashion seemed to take hold at Hoylake around that time, as you say. Certainly the 50s, before the 50s, was very few examples that we can see from photography of revetments. There were a few. There might be 3 or 4 layers of sod at the top of a particularly sort of vertical sided bunker, but realistically there were no revetments to speak of in the 50s. I think it was the 60s when it started to come in. You can see them in the 67 Open, which was obviously well photographed and documented, whereas in the 50s, Peter Thompson's win, there were no revetments to speak of.
And that was DiVincenzo in 67, yeah?
DeVincenzo, apparently that's how you pronounce it. DeVincenzo.
So, beg your pardon.
No, that's fine. It's not my family. It's fine.
Yeah, look, and the reason I mentioned that, as you well know, and as listeners, the regular listeners anyway are aware, CDP have just completed a bunker restoration, for want of a better word, in Royal Dublin. So sort of bringing the spirit of Harry Colt back, which was essentially based on some aerials from the late 40s. But one of the comments that sort of jumped out at me on Twitter from somebody that was looking at the picture going, well, that looks like a Parkland bunker. But funnily enough, it's pretty much the same sort of style that were in existence when Charles Davidson, who was the greenkeeper at the time in 1920, basically built and renovated the golf course post World War I shooting range. So it's funny that you mentioned the trend or the fashion, if you like. So there's obviously somebody out there that thinks the new bunkers in Royal Dublin look like they should be in a Parkland golf course.
Well, yeah, I mean, to any kind of untrained eye, why not? Your frames of reference are probably quite recent and limited. You only have to go back a certain distance and look at the old links bunkering to see that by no means was it Parkland in appearance. I think the thing is with revetments, we know the purpose they served initially. You can see them at the old course pre-1900 way back. The whole point being that it was just caving in and the footprint of the bunker was getting bigger, the walls becoming shallower and all that sort of thing. So it was to try and combat that. But the revetments allow you to build a bunker anywhere these days. I can see certain benefits to it. They appear to be visually fitting to fairly flat links land. It's different when you've got sort of wild dunes where you can just scrape the face off a dune and sort of turn it into a bunker. That's very natural and wild. But when you don't have those dunes on your site, then what do you do? If you were to have a very rough and ready bunker, would it be acceptable to certain eyes these days? People who quite influential, probably not. So I don't know.
I guess all they have to do is take a look at the road hole bunker over through the years in terms of how rustic and shaggy the respective faces were.
Yeah. Well, I think we know how difficult it can be to be in a small bunker with an incredibly steep face. So expectation around difficulty, new clubs that allow you to bounce a ball out of basically anywhere. All of these things are all partly to blame, I would say, for this sort of trend towards making things incredibly penal. We at Hoylake have pot bunkers almost everywhere. We did not used to, and in fairly recent memory that wasn't the case, but we do now. They are a one-shot penalty in most cases from fairways. Very, very difficult. But that's fine. It's become the character of the course, and it certainly does what it's meant to do, which is terrify you off the tee into not going in bunkers. So I suppose that's a big tick in some regards.
Yeah, maybe if we take a look at, obviously there was a fallow period where the Open Championship ignored is probably the wrong word, went down a different avenue perhaps, and 39 years passed before the honour of hosting it came back to Hoylake. What can you tell us in terms of the works that perhaps preceded the Tiger Woods' win in 06, is that right?
Yes, 06. We had there was a lot to do at the course. It wasn't just on the course. It was as we know, the infrastructure and the tenting and the various other things that go on at Opens become very serious requirement. It wasn't just a question of having a golf course that was capable of identifying good champions. There are plenty of courses that tick that box around the UK, but the infrastructure and the tenting and the sort of parking and the TV, the introduction of serious TV coverage meant that there needed to be somewhere where a proper practice ground could be installed, and a proper compound for TV coverage and vans and trucks and everything else could be situated. So yeah, the Hoylake didn't have that. It just didn't have what was required for a long time. And anyway, eventually in the run up to the 06 Open, there was some work done on the course by Donald Steele, and that involved some rejigging of bunkers and resiting of a couple of greens, rebuild of greens. A big one was the 18th, the stand green, because at the time we didn't know we were going to play it in the routing that we have today. It was just assumed it would start on 1 and finish at 18. and 18 was deemed a little lackluster as a finishing hole. So the thinking was, can we make something more interesting, particularly of the green? So that was done, and we've had that for nearly 25 years. It's not quite. I don't think it quite fits with the rest of the course. It's a very flat piece of land over there, and the green is not flat, and it looks a little man-made in places. But it certainly was more interesting, let's say, than the predecessor. But then the decision was taken in the run-up to the Open to actually start and finish on 3 and 16. 1 and 16. Sorry. So it was. Steele did his thing, and we managed to acquire the school field. So the club bought the Lees school field ahead of the 06 Open in order to accommodate the TV compound.
And obviously, from a practice perspective, and I was remembering Peter Ellis on coverage in 06 mentioning that the municipal, which is down the road and across the road and down the road, if you like, from the first tee, and the players were getting ferried from practice fairway to first tee. Obviously, you're fortunate to have the municipal down the road, and no doubt are very grateful to the operators of Same for giving up their beloved facility for the duration of Open Championships.
Oh, very much so. It's a council-owned, municipal course, and it was several fairways were taken over for the range. Also, there was some camping there and parking, so it was fundamental to the operation in 06 and beyond. Sadly, the council in recent years, throughout COVID and such, decided not to maintain the course and to let it go. So we, the club, in the knowledge that this was, crucial to the staging of the Open, continued to mow the course and keep it in check and have it playable. So people were able to come and play it as standard. Yeah, the use of that land was absolutely crucial to staging the tournament. We have a practice ground, which is I should come back to that actually, because I didn't answer your question about out of bounds properly earlier. I got distracted.
Jesus.
I'm sorry. So our out of bounds has been an interesting one. Any time over the years where we've had internal out of bounds has now been taken away. So sort of the last remaining famous out of bounds was internal out of bounds was on the left of the Dowie hole, and when that was removed in I think it was the 80s, it finally was taken out completely and became a sort of no out of bounds hole. That hole lost its teeth and its interest, so it was remodeled in the 90s. But yeah, basically speaking, we took away any internal out of bounds we could, and those internal out of bounds were just a legacy of old holes where we managed to acquire land beyond that boundary. But the essence of the hole remained, because you needed that out of bounds to keep the architecture of that hole relevant. Anyway, over time, those things were done away with, and the real lasting internal out of bounds is the one we have today, which is our practice ground. And in the very earliest days of the club, that field was not leased or owned by the club. Presumably, it still was home to livestock or whatever else. And the first and the 16th holes were laid out around this, and it was referred to as the enclosure, partly because the racetrack used to run around the outside of it. So this field, this enclosure, was not in the sort of, wasn't owned by the club. So these holes were laid out around it, and we have two of our best flatland architecture holes that use that out of bounds as a hazard. And that was from the very, very earliest days in that first 1872 update to the 18-hole course. That field remained a field, and it was out of bounds, and it always has been. The interesting thing with that out of bounds is that, in the earliest days of the club, practice was not a thing. You didn't practice. But over time, when practice did become a thing, you certainly couldn't practice on the course. So whether we'd wanted it to be internal out of bounds or not, we had nowhere to practice at all as a club. So actually the white stake thing, that was it. There was no choice. We couldn't remove it from being out of bounds if we wanted to, and if we did, then we'd have nowhere to practice at all as a club. So we had that decision to make. It's like, even if we could have made it not out of bounds, we would have nowhere to practice because the rules dictate. So there we go.
So some point after the return to Hoylake in 2006, Donald Steele's empire would morph into Mackenzie and Ebert. I'm not quite sure of the year, so Martin, if you're listening, please forgive me. And Donald, if you're listening, please also forgive me. I'm just wondering what works. I think it was probably Mackenzie and Ebert did sort of before 2014.
As far as I know, Martin and Tom Mackenzie were working with Donald Steele at that time, and were probably quite influential in some of the changes that were made. Post Donald Steele, the job was given to Martin Hawtrey, the youngest of the three generations.
Beg your pardon. Sorry, Dr. Hawtrey.
There you go. So Martin Hawtrey was his master plan was submitted in, I think it was 2007, shortly after the Open had gone. The learnings from the Open and the way it was played were sort of, put to use, and there were lots of changes made to things like green surrounds, so things like runoffs and the way it was, things were bunkered. Some bunkers were taken out, some were installed. Certainly, bunkers were reshaped. There was a massive amount of reshaping of bunkers. I think the sort of Donald Steele style bunker, slightly sort of kidney shaped thing, was deemed it was too easy for sand to blow out of them. So we had a bit of a problem with sand blow. So the idea was by making the bunkers smaller and more potty, it would hold sand better, and then the surrounding area around the bunker would act in a way that the old bunker used to do and gather balls into the sand base. So that was universally carried out across the course, and installation of man-made broken ground was put in, on left and right of drives to try and add some interest to balls that were missing fairways. Try and add some jeopardy. These days you can't see that broken ground from ground level. It doesn't look incongruous, particularly from ground level. When you do actually get up high, or you look at some of the artwork that I've produced, you can actually see this broken ground quite clearly, with some heavy light shone across it. So that was all over the course. I think there's probably about 8 or 9 holes that have that broken ground there. So yeah, that was the Hawtrey mastermind.
So obviously in advance of the 151st, I believe there's been some works done. Now, first of all, I'm going to channel my inner David Attenborough with regard to a conversation we had last Saturday, and Spartina grass in particular, which, to give it its Latin genus, I believe is Sporobolus alterniferus. Pretty invasive stuff, I believe.
I'll take your word for that Latin name.
Wikipedia anyway told me that.
So there's some debate over the veracity of this, but there are certainly scientific papers available online, readily available, that you can download and read if you're that way inclined. The Dee estuary has been silting for hundreds of years in a sort of natural fashion, partly due to the lack of traffic, ship traffic that goes down the Dee towards Chester. Chester was falling out of favour as a destination, as a port, and Liverpool and Birkenhead were taking off. So the Mersey was becoming more of a well-used shipping lane, and the Dee was silting up as a result of lack of use. So the erosion that comes off the cliffs of both sides, the North Walian side and also the Wirral side, were silting and mixing with the sand, and these sandbanks were forming and taking hold. So actually, it was a sort of vicious circle, really. The silting was kicking off, and the lack of shipping just meant that it was getting faster and faster. Anyway, they canalised the North Wales side of the river in order to allow for the occasional ships to get down there safely without getting stranded on sandbanks. But it was decided that the Wirral side should be left because actually there was no sort of shipping industry on that side. So the Wirral side sandbanks were growing, and at that time in late 20s, there was a factory owner down at Connors Quay, which is towards the border of England and Wales, right down the Dee estuary. And I think he took some advice that was to plant some Spartina grass around his factories in order to shore up the defences, and it would knit in and bind together the earth and would save it from high tides. Anyway, in doing so, he accidentally sparked this sort of growth of alien grasses, which took off in relatively quick order. So I think over throughout the late 20s, 30s, and up to the 40s, neighbouring village or nearby village, Park Gate, which used to be a popular beachside destination with a very active shipping industry, very active fishing industry, was sort of put to bed overnight because the salt marsh grew in, as I say, within the space of probably a decade, and it completely put it out of action. There was no beach to speak of. There's no fishing possible. So yeah, it was quite sad. An accident, I believe, and it's just continued to this day and continues to grow. So the grasses are spread up the estuary naturally with winds and tides, and we're seeing quite a lot of growth of this grass out by Hoylake and at West Kirby Beach. And I think sadly there's not a lot we can do about it anymore without something extremely radical, which is not going to be very popular with the environmental folk. So I'm not sure there's a lot we can do, really.
Yeah, before we get into the Mackenzie and Ebert amendments and revisions and improvements for 2023, something that actually struck me as just an interesting historical point. Hoylake was at one point a deep water anchorage for shipping. And for those people that like their Irish history, in 1690, prior to setting sail for an appointment with King James II at the Battle of the Boyne, William of Orange was hanging around Hoylake, and that's essentially where he set sail for a date with destiny.
I have heard that story before, yes. The history of the Wirral is quite an amazing one. This isn't the podcast for it now, but yeah, it's full of amazing history. It used to be the entirety of the Wirral Peninsula was designated a national park by King Charles I, would you believe?
Wow.
So there we go, yeah. And Wallasey down the road has an incredible history. All kinds of juicy pirate action and caves and everything else. Brilliant, really cool.
Anyway, Mr. Ebert and Mr. Mackenzie did some and have done some works in preparation for the upcoming 151st Open Championship. What can you finally tell us about that? We've come full circle.
We have, yeah. So there are quite a few changes made in the winter of 2019. And beyond. We've had a couple of extra changes made in more recent times, things like bunkers, a couple of bunkers added, which are good additions, I think, for the tournament. So what have we got? Where do we start? There's a couple of greens were moved. So the second green, the road hole it's called, used to be a touch bigger than it is today. They sliced off the back of that green and raised the back up. It used to be a front to back sloping green, one of the original green sites of the 9 holes, the first 9 holes. And the problem we had was that there was a maintenance path that came from the compound, the greenkeeper's compound, and the Lees School where the TV compound is going to be. It was ferrying people back and forth from Clubhouse and beyond across the maintenance lane, the sort of tarmac road, and that used to cross 2 holes, one of them being the second and the other one being the tee for the third. And the issue was that obviously there was a lot of waiting around and danger for people, trying to get across whilst people were playing. So instead, the road has been rerouted around the back of that second green and in a more intelligent sort of hugging the perimeter of the property. So part of that involved slicing away some of the back of the second green, and it's made it a smaller putting surface, which is bedded in very nicely. It looks as though it really has blended into the rest of the course, but it's left a very difficult green. It's really tricky. The runoff at the back is quite severe, and if you miss the green, you're in a bit of bother. So I'll be intrigued to see how they play that one. It's a kind of shortish par 4 anyway. It's about as close as we get to a drivable par 4, even though holding that green is going to be nigh on impossible with a driver. So I'll be really intrigued to see how they play it. There's a lot of aerial game these days, as we know. It's not really a ground game anymore for the pros. So, they'll be sending in these towering wedges, but it is a small target, and the runoff at the back is very severe. So that'll be interesting. The fifth hole, our telegraph hole, in order to install a new back tee, which has to be a certain square footage, they had to shift that green over to the left by, say, 25 yards. And what they've done is taken the essence of the old green and recreated it 25 yards to the left, allowing for this new back tee to be installed for 6. But in the move of the green, actually, it's kept the essence of the architecture of the hole, which was that the further right you go off the tee and the closer you hug the bunker on the right and the danger, the better the access you have to a sort of back pin, guarded by 2 fronting bunkers on this green. So the hole is as difficult, if not more difficult, than it always was. So that's been a good addition. That's bedded in also very nicely. But the big change is the change of the Rushes hole, which is now the Little Eye hole, and that par 3 has been flipped almost exactly 180 degrees. And as we referenced at the start of the episode, this show, the routing has changed. So not only the open routing, but the members now have a different routing. So we have a par 3 that breaks up the final 5 holes. So we used to have par 5, 4, 5, 4, 4, has now become par 5, 4, 3, 5, 4, 4.
Well done.
There you go. That was a challenge. I had to sort of close my eyes and see that. But yeah, it's been amazingly well covered, this new hole. Lots and lots of photos. It's very attractive from the air. It's got the open sand. It's got this this mountainous green which sort of pops out. This infinity green raised a good sort of 10 feet from tee to green, so you can't really see the bottom of the flag or anything. So it's very challenging. The green site is small. It's a very short hole. If you if you play a wedge up there, which is with no wind, it's basically a wedge shot, and you can get up there and you can two putt and you say, I don't know what the fuss is about. But then if you don't hit the green, then you see what the fuss is about. It's very, very difficult up and down from anywhere off the green. And if there's a strong wind, then it will undoubtedly cause some chaos, which as the second to last hole in the Open, it could do some damage to somebody's score. We will see.
I believe certainly there'll be 2 holes in the latter stages of the round, maybe 14 and 16. I don't know if they're open hole numbers or members hole numbers, so please forgive me. They're going to be over 600 yards. I'm just wondering where the prevailing wind is relative to the direction of play.
So it's the 13th and the 16th for members, the 15th and 18th for the Open. The teeing areas for both of those holes has been moved back, and they have been a sort of a byproduct of the change in hole, par 3. So the old raised tee for the rushes hole, the par 3, is now the green, and part of that raised area now is home to the new back tee for the 13th, the par 5, which is 600 and pushing 620, and that is a raised tee, and I think it plays down the prevailing wind. And I think 16 plays across it, but the approach is down the prevailing wind as well. And the 16th tee is I think it's just over 610. So both are very long holes. Let's see what the wind does. But if it's downwind, it probably make absolutely no difference whatsoever to the guys and their club choices and things, because we know where equipment is these days and these athletes and such. So
sounds like driver 6 iron, right?
Yeah, pretty much, rather than driver 4. So yeah. We'll see, but certainly it's good fun playing off the big back tee for the 13th, because you're raised up so much and you have a good old heave at it, and it's wonderful to just see the ball fly in the air. I think architecturally speaking, this is from a geeky point of view. I think the hole plays much more tricky from the green tee or the lower tee, even though in spite of it being shorter, I think there's something about not being able to see where your ball is going that was the sort of essence of Hoylake, really, I think. The smart layout of the course and its use of the flat land, I think it benefited from that, putting somebody on edge when you stand on a tee and you can't exactly see what's out in front of you other than these sort of bunkers and various other features. I know we've got yardage book these days and everybody knows their distances to the nearest foot, but I just think there's something about standing on a tee at grade where you're playing onto a fairway that doesn't really have any identifying sort of depth perception. That's removed now with the raised tee, because you can see everything out in front of you. So yeah, I think that's an interesting one, because even with the extra yardage, I think they'd probably find the scoring to be more difficult from a lower tee, shorter and lower.
You might just walk me through obviously the new par 3 rushes, which is going to play as the 17th for championship play. How circuitous is the walk from 16 championship green to play the 17th and then get back to the 18th championship tee box?
It's quite long. It is quite long. But I think, the hole is going to provide the thrills and spills that it's been built to create. So, I think that's one of those things.
I think given the extent of what you've outlined over the course of the past hour or so, change appears to be a constant at Royal Liverpool. I'm just wondering, is there any remaining unused land that's suitable for development on the site? And perhaps if you can speak, if there are in fact any future plans to do anything, and again, I do appreciate they're probably notional at the moment, but I guess more interestingly, I suppose, is there any unused land that might be suitable for something? Is probably a more pertinence to this point in time.
I would guess the non-committal version is, firstly, never say never. Secondly, there are no plans. Thirdly, I would say that unused land on the property is a rare thing, actually. With all the evolution of the course, I think most of the property has been used at some stage for golf. The areas around the duneland are obviously protected. People, the natural England folk, are very careful about what can and can't be used for golf. So where you have a maintained fairway tee green, there needs to be some sort of trade-off with natural England in order to make that usable if it sits within a triple SI zone. That is incidentally why there are a lot of sand scrape areas around the new hole, because the green lies within triple SI. So therefore there was some trade-off to be done. The open sand there is seen by natural England as a real positive for habitats, sand lizards and such. So there was a deal done, if you like, to be able to make a hole within a protected area if certain conditions were met, and opening sand up seems to be one of those things. So who's to say we could have a look at the unused land down the dune site, which is great dramatic land for golf, and have a think about it. The downside would be how would you alter perhaps the existing holes down there, which are very well loved. 9, 10, 11, 12 all playing along the coast there are fab holes. So if there were any changes to be made, it wouldn't be necessarily met with huge enthusiasm from everybody, because people are very, very fond of those holes. So who knows is the answer. Who knows, but never say never.
In terms of just the general assessment of everything we've heard from you, I mean, in your mind, or to your mind, how do you think the history of Royal Liverpool Golf Club from a developmental perspective has informed the planning and development decisions at the golf club?
The honest answer is I don't know, because my record of meetings like that doesn't go back far enough. My personal memory, so I can't really tell you anecdotally. I don't know. It certainly should. It's not like we haven't got good records. We have excellent records. We've got lots of good pictures. We've certainly got a great senior trustee in Anthony Schoen, who wrote the evolution of Hoylake alongside Richard Latham. And Anthony has a personal memory that goes back to the time when he started playing in the 50s. So I would guess he's been across all of these periods of change in some capacity, or at least has a memory of them, even if it's secondhand from a family member or friend. I would say it should. Clearly, the history of the club should be considered before any change is made or proposed. I know that Mackenzie and Ebert do excellent research into historical, archival, photos and comparisons and such. So, I would imagine ahead of this round of changes in 2019, there was certainly a lot of historical research done and used in conjunction with the proposals made.
One thing you've proved today, Joseph, is that the golf course site at Hoylake pretty well. I'm sure there's going to be some listeners that will be in attendance over the course of the number of days, both practice days and championship days at Hoylake for the 151st. For the uninitiated, perhaps, that haven't visited the site before, what advice would you proffer to spectators in order to maximise their visual enjoyment at Royal Liverpool?
That's a good question. As in, where's it best to go to? Where should they sit? Judging by the placement of the stands, I think there are two real hotspots. There's a huge, interesting looking asymmetrical stand at the back of the new hole, which is the first par 3. And that has a big tall stalk coming off the seating, which gives you a view down about 6 holes, including the 2 par 3s. So you're behind the 4th green, but you're also behind the tee for 11, the Harry Colt Alps hole. So that's a fantastic viewing point. But I think there's no getting away from it. The new hole is going to be seriously hot property. I think you're going to have to queue for quite a while to get up there to the top of that stand, which sits right alongside the green for the new hole and gives you a good look down the final tee shot. Down 18. So yeah, it's those two would be my picks, I would say.
And one last question: who's your money on?
I don't think I want to put money on. No money. My heart is just massively on Rory, obviously, because anybody who isn't on Rory doesn't have a heart.
Well, he is the defending champion per se from Hoylake. So.
He is. It would be beyond popular if he won. I think not just within the club, but all over the world. I think that the chap has been through some incredible times of late. He would be hugely popular. There are lots of guys in that sort of camp who, people would like to see win. I think there would be John Rahm would be another popular winner. Tommy would be beyond popular. But yeah, I think really, if everybody was very honest, they would say Rory.
And did Matt Jordan get through?
He did. It was amazing to see. We were following it very closely. I couldn't make it over there for the qualifying at West Lancs, but friends of ours went over. His pals who he grew up playing with at Hoylake throughout the sort of colts and junior years, they were all over there in support. And I was watching the leaderboard, refreshing the page every 2 seconds, trying to get updates. And he did it. He was brilliant. He went out and led after the first round, but it was a very tight leaderboard. My gosh, very, very tight. There was a lot of change, but he held on and he did the biz.
Any final remarks before we get into our 2 standard finishing questions?
Final remarks. All I would say is that I don't know. I think that Hoylake as an amazing piece of evolution and a sort of bastion of the game, I think is quite remarkable, and I'm just over the moon to be a member and have been a member so long, since I was a kid, and for it to be in my blood, because there's no place quite like it.
Right, so we're on to... I haven't visited this particular question in a little while because, well, I was having repeat guests on, so I didn't have the opportunity, because I was just going to get the same answers, I would assume. In terms of a bucket list, so 5 courses, there can be less than 5 courses, it can be more than 5 courses. If you want to pick 36-hole resorts or anything else, or locations, I'm happy with that. You can have played them, not played them, I really don't care. You can interpret the question however you wish. What courses appear on Joe McDonnell's bucket list?
Well, if you're allowing... if you're loose on the rules,
I'm very loose.
I like it, Shane. I like it. Okay, in which case I'll go wild here. So, a more conventional one would be Brancaster at high tide. That's the condition. Has to be at high tide. That would be bucket list stuff. I mean, Brancaster is a massive one for me. I absolutely love the place, but at high tide would be very special. It's not something I've experienced personally yet, but that would be straight in on a bucket list item. Have you played Brancaster before?
As I said to panel, the last, I'm about to rectify this particular issue, but the furthest south I played in England is Hillside. So
Crikey.
I haven't played Brancaster. But I will be getting in, let me see, what has he organised? So I've got Woking, St George's Hill with Jasper, which may just be walkabout, New Zealand, West Byfleet, St George's Hill, which may or may not happen, and the Addington with Ryan. So, but I'm getting nearer Brancaster, but I'm still not down that low.
Brancaster is like a fairy tale, absolutely mad, wonderful. So yes, do what you can, get over there. My second pick would be hopping in a time machine and going back to Westward Ho in the 1880s. So you showed me that book before, which is the sort of almanac from 1888 to whatever it is. If you have a look at the map that's in there of Royal North Devon, it is quite amazing what that place looked like in Tom Morris's day. Go for it. So yeah, judging by that map and
actually, sorry, Joe. What I'll actually do is I'll take a picture of this, so it's actually in the show notes or something.
Oh, cool. So what I would say is that we're all, I think, very familiar with the famous pictures of the Cape bunker. That whole sand network with these wonderful sort of wooden boards and ladders and things and such, and the famous painting. God, I've forgotten his name. It's escaped me. What's his name? Rowntree. Harry Rowntree. So absolutely fabulous painting. But what people don't quite grasp is that the entire site looked like that in the old days. The entire site. So it was a wild playground of sand and turf. And I think, so can you see it? You got it?
I have it, yeah.
So part of me wants to spend a couple of weeks trying to recreate this in a 3D model if I could, but it would take a while.
I'm right in saying that there's the islands of grass essentially, and the rest is sand.
Yeah, precisely.
Wow, that's a safari.
Yeah, precisely. So, we see open sand on links courses becoming more prevalent, but actually that was, let's call it the original. I mean, that looks like it was, as you say, these islands of turf, which were the playing surfaces, but everything else was just this sort of wild open sand stuff. So I think I would go back in time in a jiffy there. But whilst I've got the time machine, I would also go back to the old course in Old Course St Andrews.
Time machine. Jesus Christ, Joe.
You told me the rules were fluid.
Yeah, go on then, so. Go on,
physics,
because I like you.
Physics be damned. So, so the old course in the late 1800s. So around when Tom Morris was revealing the right-hand course, if you like, I would love to have played not just the old course in reverse, but to what it is today in the sort of left-hand routing. But I would love to have played it in reverse shortly after Morris had sort of pushed back the gorse and revealed the what are now the fairways for the front nine. Because I think what you play in reverse today, sure, is a lovely sort of harkening back to the old days. But the course was very, very different in those days. Very different. Bunkers were different, open sand in certain places, and the way it played would be very, very different to today. So I would love to play it in reverse, but in the late 1800s.
Are there any photos of that?
There's maps. You can see how the course, how rough and ready it was before about 1900, and these sorts of areas that are referenced in people like Braid's account of how he played in opens and things like that. It's the strategy for certain holes based on these large sort of areas of sand that were unplayable. It's really amazing. And if you read. Anyway, I'll come back to that in a sec. We're on our time machine mission here, and I'm going to go to Hoylake in 1935. And the reason 1935 is because we've got an old aerial in the club on the wall there, and I've studied it quite extensively, and I feel as though I'm very familiar with it from above. But I'd love to see it on the ground. I would love to see it. So Hoylake in 35, and then finally, I would like to see Birkdale in the mid-30s, just after it had been rebuilt.
You're a weirdo.
I would love to see that. I would love it. Have you seen the aerials from the 40s?
No.
At Birkdale. Oh my gosh, so cool. Lovely irregular bunkering and these sort of, mad shapes and big expansive fairways and things and cool greens. I would love to see Birkdale in the 30s.
I have a feeling you have that on your phone, though.
Yeah, reference them anytime, in about 2 seconds, jump straight to it. But yeah, I would love to see those ones. So most of these are in the past, but I think Brancaster at high tide would really give me a huge thrill.
Okay, is that it? Can we have anything modern? No?
No.
Nothing modern, okay. Back in your box, Darby.
There you go.
Okay, well, thank you very much for sharing the time machine voyage with us there. You're the first person to do that. I'm not surprised that you did that, but thank you nonetheless.
Told you I was a geek.
Yeah, well, I mean, we need to fast forward to Star Trek and what they used to do to travel through time. Time becomes a loop and all that sort of stuff.
That's the one.
Final question relates to 2 book recommendations. So anybody that has a golfing library out there, what would you suggest they add to it?
I mentioned it before, but the Richard Latham series of course evolutions are fantastic. He's done 4, one of which was the Anthony Schoen Hoylake one, which I recommend to all. It gives you a really good insight into how the course has changed. The other ones in his series are Muirfield, which is equally great, Woodall Spa, and the County Down. So those 4 are very much worth your while picking up, and you still can. If you go onto Richard Latham's site, Latham Publishing, I think it is, you can buy all 4 of them from there. So those are well recommended. And the other one is Evolution of the Old Course by Scott McPherson. And he has just re-released with a load of updates since its initial first outing. I can't remember when he released it first. It was sometime around late 90s something. But anyway, 25 years later, he's released an updated version, which features a couple of my illustrations. I helped him out on some bits and bobs. So if you can pick it up, go for it. Shane, have you got one on the shelf?
Have you?
You haven't got the new one yet, have you?
I haven't, no.
You need the new one. That's got my pickies in it.
It's not released yet. So 07 was the last publication.
There you go. So 15 years later. So yeah, fabulous book. I mean, the research that's gone into that is just off the charts. You know, he's poured his heart and soul into that. Speaking of charts, it's filled with charts and records and chronology and lots of great photos and very nicely put together book. That would get my seal of approval. So
yeah, you had a podcast there for a while. It seems to have it paused. Maybe it's the kindest thing to say.
You must have a job, Shane.
I've got a fucking job. So do you. Anyway,
I know.
You can't really call what you do a job, though. I mean,
No, I just whiz around with a mouse and just generally have fun.
And spam people in their WhatsApp with lots of stuff. Anyway,
yeah.
Thank you for that, by the way. Right, before we let you go, how can listeners keep tabs on you or perhaps make contact should they require the services of a digital imagery specialist?
Send me an email, please. Joe, J-O-E, at joemcdgolf.com. That would be very nice. Always up for a chat.
Joe McDonnell, it's been my absolute pleasure to pick your brain with regard to the historical development of Hoylake. Many thanks for affording me the time and continued success in all that you do, and best wishes specifically to the wider Liverpool Golf Club membership in hosting the 151st Open Championships over the coming weeks. Go easy.
Lovely. Thanks, Shane. Bye-bye.
Many thanks for tuning in. As usual, you can find us online at firmandfast.golf or on Twitter at firmandfastgolf. Please continue to like, subscribe and comment. It really is appreciated. Until the next time, happy golfing.